I woke up that morning knowing I might die on an operating table by noon, and my daughter was arguing with me about carry-on luggage sizes. That's the sentence I never thought I'd say out loud. But here I am, 63 years old, sitting in my quiet house with nothing but the hum of the refrigerator and the weight of what happened pressing down on my chest like a stone. If you've ever felt invisible in your own family, if you've ever wondered when you stopped mattering to the people you gave everything to, then you know exactly where my story begins. Go ahead and comment below where you're watching this from. I want to know I'm not alone in this. And if you want to hear more stories like mine, stories about betrayal, survival, and what happens when you finally take your power back, check the description box below. You'll find others who've walked this path. My name is Eleanor Price. Eleanor June Price, if we're being formal, though no one's called me that since my mother died 12 years ago. I raised 2 children on a secretary's salary after my husband walked out when our youngest was 7. I worked double shifts, missed school plays I desperately wanted to attend, ate leftovers for dinner so they could have fresh meals, and put both of them through college without a single loan. My daughter Bethany got her marketing degree. My son Joel became an accountant. I was so proud I could barely breathe at their graduations. But somewhere along the way, between their successes and my sacrifices, I became background noise. The tumor in my chest was discovered 4 months before that terrible morning. A routine mammogram that wasn't routine at all. Stage 2, the doctor said, her face carefully neutral. Treatable, she said. Surgery, then treatment. My odds were good if we moved quickly. I remember sitting in that sterile office, the paper gown crinkling beneath me, thinking about who I needed to call first. Bethany was 31, living in a beautiful apartment in Seattle, working for some tech startup that paid her more in a year than I'd made in 5. Joel was 28, married to a sweet girl named Amanda, living 2 states away in Colorado. I called Bethany first. She was in a meeting. She called back 3 hours later, distracted, asking me to make it quick. When I told her, there was a pause. Long enough that I thought the call had dropped, and then she said, "Oh my God, Mom. I'm so sorry. What do the doctors say?" I told her about the surgery, about the timeline. She made sympathetic noises, promised to call me back, and then I didn't hear from her for 6 days. Joel was gentler, more present, but he had a newborn and Amanda was struggling with postpartum depression. He couldn't fly out, he explained, and I understood. I really did. I'd been a young parent once. I knew how all-consuming it was. So I handled it alone. I attended the pre-op appointments alone. I filled out the advance directives alone, sitting at my kitchen table with a cup of tea gone cold, trying to decide who should make medical decisions if I couldn't. I settled on Bethany. She was the oldest, the most successful. Surely she'd step up when it mattered. The surgery was scheduled for June 14th. A Thursday. I marked it on my calendar in red ink, a little circle around the date like it was someone's birthday. I'd need someone to drive me home afterward, the hospital said. I'd be groggy, unsteady. I couldn't be alone for the first 24 hours. Standard procedure. I called Bethany again 3 weeks before the surgery. This time she answered on the second ring, and I could hear music in the background, laughter. She was at brunch with friends. "Mom, hi, what's up?" she said, and I could picture her there, my beautiful daughter with her highlighted hair and her expensive sunglasses, probably sitting on some rooftop patio overlooking the city. I told her about the date. About needing help. About being scared, though I tried to keep my voice steady. There was another pause, shorter this time, and then she said, "June 14th? Mom, that's... Okay, let me check my calendar." I waited. I heard her talking to someone else, her voice muffled like she'd covered the phone. Then she came back. "Mom, I'm so sorry, but I'm actually going to be out of town that week. Sarah and I, you remember Sarah, my friend from work? We've been planning this trip to Rome for months. It's her 30th birthday. I already bought the tickets." Something inside me went very still. "You're going to Rome," I repeated. "I know, the timing is terrible," she said, and she did sound sorry, in that abstract way people sound sorry about things that don't actually affect them. "But you said the surgery is routine, right? The doctors are confident? And it's just outpatient." It wasn't outpatient. It was a 6-hour procedure. They'd be removing part of my lung along with the tumor. I'd told her this. I'd explained it all. But somewhere between my mouth and her ears, the information had gotten lost, or maybe it had never seemed important enough to retain. "It's a major surgery, Bethany," I said quietly. "I need someone there." "Can't Joel do it?" she asked, and I heard the shift in her voice, the way she was already moving on, already calculating how to make this someone else's problem. I closed my eyes. "Joel has the baby. Amanda's not doing well. I can't ask him." "What about your friends? Janet? Diane?" Janet was dead. She'd passed 2 years ago from a stroke. Diane had moved to Arizona to be near her grandchildren. I'd told Bethany both these things. Multiple times. But she'd forgotten, or she'd never really listened in the first place. "There's no one else," I said, and my voice cracked despite my best efforts. "Bethany, please. I'm scared. I don't want to be alone for this." Another pause. Longer this time. I could hear her breathing, could almost hear her weighing her options, deciding how much of herself she was willing to give. And then she said the words that would haunt me for months. "Mom, I really can't cancel this trip. Sarah's counting on me. But I'll call you before the surgery, okay? And I'll check in after. You're going to be fine. You're the strongest person I know." The strongest person she knew. That's what you tell someone when you want them to handle things alone. When you want to absolve yourself of responsibility. When you need them not to need you. I hung up feeling hollowed out, like something essential had been scooped from my chest and I was just going through the motions of being whole. I called a neighbor, Mrs. Patterson from 2 doors down, an 80-year-old widow who'd never met a person she wouldn't help. She agreed immediately, bless her, and I tried to feel grateful instead of heartbroken. The week before the surgery, Bethany posted on social media. I saw it because Joel called me, his voice tight with anger. "Have you seen what Bethany's posting?" he asked. I hadn't. I didn't use those platforms much. He texted me screenshots. There was Bethany, radiant in the airport, holding up 2 first-class tickets. "Surprising my bestie with an upgrade for her 30th. The caption read, "Rome, here we come. Wineglass airplane, #birthday week, #best friends forever, #living our best lives. First class. To Rome. For a friend's birthday." While I was preparing to have part of my body removed. I stared at that photo for a long time. At my daughter's smile, so wide and genuine. At the expensive luggage behind her. At the champagne glass emoji in her caption. And I realized something I'd been avoiding for years. I had given so much of myself to my children that there was nothing left they felt they needed to give back. If you've ever had that moment where you see yourself clearly in the eyes of someone you love and realize you're nothing more than an afterthought, then you understand what happened to my heart that night. It didn't break. Breaking would have been cleaner, sharper. This was more like a slow crumbling, like old brick turning to dust. But here's what I didn't know yet, what I couldn't have possibly imagined as I sat alone in my house, Googling what to expect during lung surgery. The universe has a funny way of forcing people to see what they've refused to look at. And sometimes, just sometimes, the thing you think will kill you is actually the thing that saves you in ways you never expected. The morning of June 14th arrived with cruel sunshine, the kind of bright, cheerful weather that feels like an insult when you're terrified. Mrs. Patterson picked me up at 5:30 in the morning, her ancient Buick smelling like lavender and peppermint. She held my hand in the waiting room, this woman who barely knew me, while my own daughter was somewhere over the Atlantic Ocean, drinking Prosecco at 35,000 feet. And when they wheeled me into that operating room, when the anesthesia started pulling me under and the last thing I saw was the bright surgical lights above me, my final conscious thought wasn't of my children or my life or even my fear of dying. It was simply this: I am so tired of being forgotten. What I didn't know, what none of us knew, was that in less than 6 hours, my daughter would be frantically trying to call me from a hotel room in Rome, her hands shaking so badly she could barely hold her phone. Because by then, the whole country would know my name. And the reason why would change everything. I want to tell you about Dr. David Richardson, because understanding him is understanding everything that came after. And if you're still watching, if this story is gripping you the way it gripped me, do me a favor and hit that subscribe button. I promise you, What happens next is going to make you question everything you think you know about family, loyalty, and the strange way fate works. And check the description box for more stories about people who found strength when they were at their lowest. Because that's exactly what happened to me. Dr. Richardson wasn't my first choice for a surgeon. He wasn't even my second. My original surgeon, Dr. Patricia Holmes, had a family emergency 2 weeks before my procedure. Her father had a massive stroke and she had to fly to Florida indefinitely. The hospital scrambled to reassign her patients, and I got the call on a Tuesday afternoon. "We've arranged for Dr. David Richardson to take over your case," the scheduler said. "He's one of our best. You're in excellent hands." I looked him up that night, sitting at my computer in my small home office, the room where I used to help my kids with homework all those years ago. Dr. David Richardson, Chief of Thoracic Surgery. Graduated top of his class from Johns Hopkins. Published extensively. Pioneered several minimally invasive techniques. His credentials were impeccable. But it was his photo that stopped me. He had kind eyes. That was my first thought. This man with his salt and pepper hair and his calm expression had the kind of eyes that looked like they'd seen suffering and hadn't turned away from it. I realize now how much I needed to see that kindness, how desperate I was for someone to actually see me. We met once before the surgery, a brief consultation where he reviewed my scans and explained the procedure in detail. He was patient, thorough. When I asked nervous questions, he answered every single one without making me feel foolish. At the end of the appointment, he did something no other doctor had done. He asked if I had family coming to support me. I lied. I told him yes, that my daughter would be checking in. It was too humiliating to admit the truth to this stranger, that my child had chosen Rome over me. He looked at me for a long moment, and I had the strangest feeling he knew I wasn't being entirely honest. But he just nodded and said, "Good. You'll need people around you during recovery. Surgery is as much emotional as physical." The morning of the surgery, in those final moments before they wheeled me away, a nurse asked me a standard question. "Is there anyone you'd like us to contact during or after the procedure? Anyone who should be updated?" I gave her Mrs. Patterson's number. I didn't give her Bethany's. By then, I'd stopped expecting my daughter to show up, even in the smallest ways. What happened during those 6 hours on the operating table, I only learned about later. But I'll tell you what Dr. Richardson told me, in his own quiet way, weeks after everything exploded. The surgery was complicated. The tumor had wrapped itself around a major blood vessel in a way the scans hadn't fully revealed. What should have been a 5-hour procedure stretched to 7. There was a moment, he told me, about 4 hours in, where my blood pressure dropped dangerously low and they had to make a split-second decision about how aggressive to be with the resection. He made a call that saved my life but went against the standard protocol. He chose a riskier technique, one that required extraordinary precision, because the alternative would have left cancerous tissue behind. It worked. He got clean margins. He stopped the bleeding. He pieced me back together with the kind of care that you can't teach in medical school. But here's what made it national news, what made it the story that would eventually force my daughter to see me. There were medical students observing the surgery that day. And one of them was a documentary filmmaker's daughter who'd been granted special access to shadow surgeons for a project about medical innovation. She had her camera with her. With permission, with all the proper releases signed by the hospital, she'd been filming various procedures for a documentary about groundbreaking surgical techniques. And she caught those critical moments when Dr. Richardson made his decision, when he fought to save my life using a method so innovative, so risky, that it hadn't been widely documented before. The footage was remarkable. Even I could see that when I finally watched it, weeks later, my hand pressed to my healing chest. You could hear the tension in the operating room, the controlled urgency. You could see Dr. Richardson's absolute focus, the way his hands moved with impossible steadiness. And you could hear him talking to his team, explaining his reasoning, teaching even in that moment of crisis. "This patient deserves every chance," he said on that recording, his voice calm despite the emergency. "She deserves us at our very best." The documentary filmmaker saw the footage and knew she had something special. She contacted the hospital. They contacted Dr. Richardson. And he made a decision that would change my life. He said yes to letting them use the footage, on one condition. That I consented. That I understood what it meant. I was still in the ICU when he came to ask me. I was groggy, in pain, tethered to machines that beeped and whirred. Mrs. Patterson was sitting beside my bed, reading a magazine. My phone was on the side table, notifications piling up from people I hadn't heard from in months, all because the hospital had sent out some kind of update to my emergency contacts. But nothing from Bethany. Not a single message. Dr. Richardson pulled up a chair. He explained about the footage, about the documentary, about how what happened in that operating room could help other surgeons, could save other lives. It's entirely your choice, he said. I won't be offended if you say no. Your privacy matters more than any documentary. I looked at this man who'd fought for me when my own child couldn't be bothered to send a text message. This man who saw me as someone deserving of his very best. And I thought about Bethany on her Roman holiday, probably eating gelato in some beautiful piazza, laughing with Sarah, posting photos of Trevi Fountain or the Colosseum, living her best life while I was barely living at all. Will it have my name? I asked. Will people know who I am? He nodded. It's more powerful that way. Real patient, real outcome. But again, only if you're comfortable. I was 63 years old and I'd spent my entire adult life being invisible. Making myself smaller so others could be bigger. Staying quiet so others could be loud. Fading into the background of my own story. I looked at Dr. Richardson and I said yes. The documentary aired as a special segment on a major medical news program 3 days later. National broadcast, prime time. They called it the surgery that redefined emergency protocol, or something equally dramatic. It showed Dr. Richardson explaining the technique, showed brief, carefully edited moments from my surgery, showed my post-op recovery. They interviewed him about the decision-making process, about the risks he'd taken, about why this particular case mattered. And they said my name. Eleanor June Price. 63-year-old mother of 2 from a small town outside of Pittsburgh. Cancer survivor. The face of a medical breakthrough. I didn't watch it when it aired. I was home by then, staying with Mrs. Patterson because I still couldn't manage stairs easily. She'd set me up in her guest room, had been bringing me soup and magazines and asking nothing in return except that I let her help. We were watching some gardening show when her phone started ringing. Then mine started. Then her landline. Friends I hadn't spoken to in years. Distant cousins. People from my old church. Everyone had seen it. Everyone was calling to congratulate me, to tell me I was brave, to say they'd had no idea I was sick. Why hadn't I told them? But the call that mattered, the call that started everything that came after, was from Joel. It was close to midnight East Coast time, which meant it was early morning in Rome. His voice was shaking. "Mom," he said. "Mom, are you okay? We just saw, Amanda's sister just called us, she saw you on the news." "Mom, what happened? Why didn't you tell us how serious it was?" Before I could answer, I heard Bethany's voice in the background, high and frantic. "Let me talk to her. Let me talk to Mom." And that's when I realized, while I was on that operating table, while Dr. Richardson was fighting to save my life, my daughter had been toasting her best friend in some Italian restaurant, completely unaware. They'd been having the time of their lives, posting their adventures, counting their blessings. They forgot to ask who my surgeon was. They forgot to ask anything at all, really. Until they saw us on the news. The thing about becoming unintentionally famous is that you can't control the narrative once it's out there. And when the internet gets hold of a story that has a hero doctor, a brave patient, and a family that wasn't there, well, people have opinions. Strong ones. Bethany called me 17 times that first night. I didn't answer. I couldn't. I was sitting in Mrs. Patterson's guest room, my chest aching from more than just the surgery, staring at my phone as it lit up over and over with my daughter's name. Joel called too, but he left voicemails, his voice thick with tears, apologizing over and over. But Bethany just kept calling. No voicemails. Just this desperate, insistent ringing that felt like it might never stop. Mrs. Patterson knocked softly on my door around 1 in the morning. "Eleanor, honey, you need to rest. Should I turn your phone off for you?" Her voice was so gentle, So full of the kind of mothering I'd given to others my whole life but rarely received myself. I shook my head. No. Let it ring. I want to hear it. Does that sound cruel? Maybe it was. But I'd spent 4 months terrified and alone, 4 months arranging my possible death by myself, and my daughter had been too busy living her life to notice. Now she noticed. Now, when strangers knew my story before she did, when the whole country had seen me vulnerable and fighting while she was clinking wine glasses under Roman stars, now she was desperate to reach me. If you've ever been in a position where someone only valued you after others recognized your worth, you know why I needed to hear that phone ring. You know why I needed her to sit with her panic, her guilt, her fear of what people would think. Check the description box if you want to hear more stories about people who had to lose everything before their families finally saw them. Because that's exactly what was happening to me. I was being seen, finally, but only because the whole world was watching. The story went viral by morning. Not just the medical documentary, that was impressive but niche. What went viral was what came after, what people started piecing together from social media. Someone found Bethany's Instagram. Someone always does, don't they? They found her cheerful posts from Rome, time-stamped and geotagged. Her photos from the Colosseum, from Vatican City, from expensive restaurants. Living my best life. She'd written under a photo of her and Sarah holding gelato, dated the exact day of my surgery. And people connected the dots. The comment sections filled up fast. Some were sympathetic to Bethany. She didn't know how serious it was. Don't judge. But most weren't. Most were scolding. Imagine choosing a vacation over your mother's cancer surgery. First-class tickets to Rome but couldn't be bothered to check on her mom? This is what's wrong with this generation. No loyalty, no family values. A few news outlets picked it up as a human interest angle. Devoted surgeon saves patient while family vacations abroad, one headline read. Another, daughter's Roman holiday overshadows mother's life-saving surgery. They were trying to be delicate about it, I think, not naming Bethany directly. But the internet isn't delicate. People found her. They flooded her accounts. She made everything private within 12 hours, but the screenshots lived forever. People shared them, commented on them, dissected every caption and emoji. Strangers were defending me, championing me, and condemning my daughter with a ferocity that honestly frightened me. Because here's the truth, I was angry at Bethany. Furious, heartbroken, all of it. But I didn't want her destroyed. She was still my child, even if she'd forgotten I was her mother. She finally stopped calling around dawn and sent a text instead. Just one, long and rambling. Mom, please answer. I'm so sorry, I didn't know it was that serious. I thought you said it was routine. I never would have gone if I'd known everyone's attacking me online, saying horrible things. I'm trying to get a flight home, but everything's booked. Please Mom, I'm so scared. I love you. I'm so sorry. Please just let me know you're okay. No punctuation. Just panic spilling out in one desperate run-on sentence. I read it 3 times. I thought about my daughter, this woman I'd raised to be strong and independent and confident, now probably sitting in some hotel room while her best friend slept, realizing that the whole world knew she'd chosen wrong. That she'd failed in the most public way possible. Part of me wanted to comfort her immediately, to fix it the way I'd fixed everything when she was small. But a larger part, the part that had been neglected and diminished and forgotten for years, needed her to sit in this. To understand not just what she'd done, but what she'd been doing for a long time. I texted back, I'm alive. I'll call when I'm ready. That was all. 6 words. And then I turned my phone on silent and tried to sleep. Joel and Amanda showed up at Mrs. Patterson's house 36 hours later. They'd driven through the night from Colorado, their 3-month-old baby in tow. When I opened the door and saw my son standing there, his eyes red and swollen, my grandson in his arms, something in my chest that had nothing to do with surgery cracked wide open. I'm so sorry, Mom, Joel said, and then he was crying, really crying, in a way I hadn't seen since he was a little boy. I should have been there. I should have made it work. I'm so sorry. I pulled him into as much of a hug as my healing body could manage. You have a newborn, I whispered. You couldn't have known. But I should have asked more questions. I should have pushed. When Bethany said she was going to Rome, I should have. He trailed off, shaking his head. Amanda stepped forward, her face exhausted in that particular way new mothers are exhausted. "We saw the segment," she said quietly. "We saw what you went through. And then we saw Bethany's posts, and Joel called her and..." She stopped, glancing at Joel. "I yelled at her," Joel admitted. "Really yelled. I told her she should be ashamed. That what she did was unforgivable. She's a mess, Mom. She's trying to get home, but she's so scared you'll never forgive her." I looked at my son, at his wife, at my tiny grandson asleep in his carrier. This was the family that had a legitimate reason for absence. New baby, struggling mother, 2 states away. Yet here they were, having dropped everything to drive through the night to see me. And Bethany, who lived a comfortable life with disposable income and complete freedom, had chosen Rome. "Do you think I should forgive her?" I asked Joel. He was quiet for a long moment. Finally, he said, "I think that's up to you, Mom. But I also think she needs to understand what she did. Really understand it. Not just feel bad because people online are mad at her, but understand how she's treated you for years. Years. Not just this one trip. Years of being too busy, too distracted, too absorbed in her own life to make space for mine." Joel saw it too. Maybe he'd always seen it. Bethany got home 4 days after the documentary aired. She'd managed to get an earlier flight, paying a small fortune to change her tickets. She called from the airport in New York, her voice small and broken. "Can I come see you, Mom? Please." I was back in my own house by then, Joel and Amanda having helped me settle in, having stocked my fridge and set up everything I'd need. Mrs. Patterson checked on me daily. People from my old church brought casseroles. Neighbors I barely knew dropped off flowers. Strangers sent cards to the hospital, addressed simply to Eleanor Price, the brave lung surgery patient. I wasn't alone anymore. And maybe that's why I felt strong enough to tell Bethany yes, she could come. But that I needed her to really listen. Bethany arrived at my house on a Tuesday evening, a full week after my surgery. I watched through the window as she got out of her rental car, moving slowly, like she was approaching something dangerous. She looked terrible, hair unwashed, no makeup, wearing sweatpants and a wrinkled t-shirt. This was not the polished, put-together daughter I was used to seeing in her carefully curated photos. She stood on my porch for a long moment before knocking. I could see her through the frosted glass, could see her wiping at her face. When I opened the door, she looked at me and immediately burst into tears. "Mom," she sobbed, and tried to hug me. I stepped back. Not cruelly, but firmly. "Careful," I said. "I'm still healing." She froze, her arms halfway extended, and something in her face crumpled even further. Because it wasn't really about the physical healing, and we both knew it. I gestured her inside. We sat in my living room, her on the couch where she'd spent countless hours as a teenager, me in my worn armchair. The same furniture from when she was young. Nothing in this house had changed much, including me. I'd stayed frozen, always available, always ready to be whatever my children needed. Until I almost died and realized they didn't need me at all. "Everyone hates me," Bethany said finally, her voice small. "My Instagram, my Facebook, I had to delete everything. People from high school are sending me messages calling me a terrible daughter. Someone found my LinkedIn and left a review on my company page calling me heartless. Sarah's upset because our trip got ruined. I can't," she stopped, pressing her hands to her face. "I can't believe this is happening." I sat very still, listening. Waiting to hear the one thing I needed to hear. "I'm so embarrassed," she continued. "When we saw you on the news in that hospital bed, and the surgeon was talking about how touch and go it was, and I realized we were posting pictures of pasta and fountains while you were," her voice broke. "How do I fix this, Mom? Tell me how to fix this." There it was. Not "I'm sorry for abandoning you." Not "I'm sorry for not being there when you were terrified." Just, how do I fix my reputation? How do I make people stop being mad at me? "Bethany," I said quietly, "why did you come home?" She looked at me, confused. "What do you mean?" "Because you had surgery. Because you almost died." "But you knew about the surgery before. You knew the date. You chose Rome anyway." I didn't know it was that serious. You said. I told you, I interrupted, my voice still calm but firm. I told you it was a 6-hour surgery. I told you they were removing part of my lung. I told you I was scared and I needed someone there. You heard all of that. You just decided it wasn't more important than Sarah's birthday. She opened her mouth, closed it. You said your odds were good. You made it sound like it wasn't a big deal. I said that to make you feel better about choosing Rome, I said. Because I knew you'd already made your decision and I didn't want you to feel guilty. I spent 4 months protecting your feelings about my cancer, Bethany. Do you understand how backwards that is? Tears were streaming down her face now. I'm sorry, Mom. I'm so sorry. I should have been there. I should have. You should have asked, I said. You should have looked up what a thoracic surgery entails. You should have called Dr. Richardson's office and asked them directly how serious it was. You should have wanted to know. But you didn't, because somewhere along the way, I became optional to you. The words hung in the air between us, devastating in their simplicity. That's not true, Bethany whispered. You're my mother. You're not optional. Then when was the last time you asked about my life? I asked. Not just how are you in passing, but really asked. When was the last time you wanted to know what I was reading, or thinking, or worried about? When was the last time I wasn't just a checkbox on your to-do list? Call Mom, check, before you went back to your real life. She couldn't answer. We both knew there wasn't an answer that would make this better. I leaned forward, my chest aching. I almost died on that table, Bethany. Dr. Richardson told me later that there was a moment when my blood pressure dropped and they didn't know if they could stabilize me. I was on the edge of never waking up, and you were eating gelato. And that's not, I had to stop, breathe through the pain. That's not entirely your fault. Because I trained you to think I was invincible. I trained you to believe I'd always be fine, always be here, always manage on my own. I never asked for help because I didn't want to burden you. And you learned that lesson perfectly. So this is my fault? She asked, defensive now. You're saying I'm a terrible daughter because you never asked for help? I'm saying we're both responsible for what our relationship became, I said. But what happened with this surgery with Rome, that choice was yours alone. And you need to understand that you didn't just miss my surgery. You've been missing me for years. You just didn't notice until the whole world did. There was a long silence. Bethany was crying quietly, her hands twisted in her lap. Finally, she said, I don't know how to be better. I don't know how to fix this. Neither do I admitted. But I know it doesn't start with you being sorry people found out. It starts with you being sorry for what you did, regardless of whether anyone knew about it. She nodded slowly. I am sorry, Mom. Not just because people know, but because I hurt you. Because I wasn't there. Because I've been a selfish, terrible daughter. It wasn't everything. It wasn't enough to erase the pain. But it was a beginning. We talked for 3 more hours that night. Really talked, in a way we hadn't in years. I told her about the fear I'd lived with for months, about the nights I'd laid awake wondering who would remember me if I died, about the loneliness of facing mortality alone. She told me about her life, about the pressure she felt to appear successful, about how somewhere along the way she'd started performing her life instead of living it. I saw you as so strong, she said. I think I convinced myself you didn't need anyone. That you were happy being independent. I was strong because I had to be, I said. Not because I wanted to be. Before she left that night, she asked, are we going to be okay? You and me. I thought about it honestly. I don't know yet, I said. But I want to try. She hugged me then carefully, mindfully of my healing chest. And for the first time in years, it felt like she was really present, really there with me instead of already thinking about where she needed to be next. The aftermath of the documentary faded eventually, the way internet storms always do. People moved on to the next outrage, the next story. Bethany's accounts stayed private for months. She came to visit every other weekend after that first night, making the trip from Seattle without complaint. Joel and Amanda brought the baby monthly. My house, which had been so empty for so long, started to feel full again. Dr. Richardson and I stayed in touch. He checked on my recovery personally, going beyond what any surgeon typically does. When I thanked him for that, for his extraordinary care, he said, "You deserved someone fighting for you. I'm just glad I was in a position to do it." About 6 months after the surgery, after I'd completed treatment and gotten my first clear scan, I did something I'd never done before. I went to therapy. Not because I was broken, but because I wanted to understand how I'd spent 63 years making myself small for other people. How I'd taught my children that my needs didn't matter. The therapist asked me once, "What would you tell your younger self, the woman who was raising those kids alone and sacrificing everything?" I thought about it for a long time. Finally, I said, "I'd tell her that teaching your children to value you isn't selfish. It's necessary. And that love without boundaries isn't really love, it's just slow erasure." The documentary won some kind of medical journalism award. They invited me to the ceremony, and I went, wearing a dress Bethany helped me pick out. She came with me, actually, took time off work, paid for her own flight, sat beside me in that auditorium while they showed clips of my surgery on a giant screen. When they called my name to stand and be recognized, she squeezed my hand so tight it hurt. "I'm proud of you, Mom," she whispered. And I believed her. But here's what I need you to understand, because this is the real lesson of everything that happened. Forgiveness isn't the same as forgetting. Bethany and I are rebuilding our relationship, but it's different now. I don't make excuses for her anymore. I don't minimize my own needs to accommodate hers. And she's learning, slowly, imperfectly, to show up not just when it's convenient, but when it matters. Some people think the documentary ruined our relationship, that the public scrutiny and the internet's judgment did irreparable damage. But the truth is, the documentary saved us. Because without it, we would have kept going exactly as we were. Me fading further into the background, her drifting further into her own world, until one day I'd be gone and she'd have to live with the fact that she never really knew me. The tumor they removed was malignant, but they got it all. Clean margins, just like Dr. Richardson promised. My prognosis is excellent. I'm expected to live a long, healthy life. And I plan to, but differently than before. I joined a book club. I started volunteering at a women's shelter, helping other women who've spent their lives putting everyone else first. I even went on a date, just one so far, nothing serious, but the point is I did it. I made space for my own life instead of just existing in the margins of everyone else's. Joel told me recently that he thinks about that night all the time. The night he saw me on the news and realized how close he'd come to losing me without really knowing me. "It changed me as a father," he said. "I want my son to grow up knowing that his parents are people too. That we have needs and feelings and lives that matter." That's the legacy I want from all of this. Not the fame from the documentary, not even the medical breakthrough that might help other patients. I want my grandchildren to grow up in a family where people see each other, where presence matters more than performance, where showing up is valued more than looking good on social media. The internet has mostly forgotten about Eleanor Price, the lung surgery patient whose family was partying abroad. I'm okay with that. I never wanted to be famous. I just wanted to be seen by the people I loved. And in the strangest, most painful way possible, that's exactly what happened. There's a photo from the awards ceremony that Bethany posted. She eventually reopened her accounts, but she uses them differently now, less curated, more honest. In the photo, I'm standing on that stage being recognized, and she's in the audience clapping, tears streaming down her face. She captioned it simply, "My mom almost died and I almost missed it. Never again." People commented with heart emojis, with supportive messages. But one comment stuck with me. Someone wrote, "It's brave to admit when you've failed someone you love. It's even braver to do the work to change." That's where we are now, Bethany and me, doing the work. Some days are harder than others. Sometimes she slips back into old patterns, gets too busy, forgets to call. But now, when I tell her I need her, she listens. And when she can't be there, she's honest about why instead of making excuses. Is it perfect? No. Will we ever get back those years of distance, that surgery day she missed? No. But we have something we didn't have before, truth. Painful, uncomfortable, necessary truth. I think about that moment on the operating table sometimes, the moment Dr. Richardson described where everything hung in the balance. He said he made a choice to fight for me, to take a risk because I deserved every chance. And I realize now that I made a choice too, when I said yes to the documentary. I chose to be seen. I chose to stop hiding my pain to make everyone else comfortable. I chose to matter, publicly and undeniably, even though it meant exposing the hardest parts of my life. That choice changed everything. If you're watching this and you see yourself in my story, if you're the person who always gives, who always accommodates, who makes yourself small so others can be big, I want you to hear this: you are allowed to need people. You are allowed to ask for help. You are allowed to expect the people you love to show up for you. And if they don't, you're allowed to be angry about it. You're allowed to demand better. You're allowed to matter. And if you're watching this and you see yourself in Bethany's story, if you're the child or the partner or the friend who's been taking someone for granted, who's been so wrapped up in your own life that you forgot to check on the people who've always been there for you, it's not too late. It's never too late to start showing up. To start asking the hard questions. To start seeing the people you love as full human beings with needs and fears and lives that matter just as much as yours. The day I said yes to letting them use that surgery footage, I didn't know it would go viral. I didn't know strangers would defend me, or that my daughter would face public scrutiny, or that my story would become something people discussed over dinner and in online forums. I just knew that I was tired of being invisible. I was tired of my pain not mattering. And I made a choice to let it matter, consequences be damned. That choice gave me my life back. Not just the life Dr. Richardson saved on that operating table, but the life I'd been slowly giving away for decades, piece by piece, until there was almost nothing left. I'm 73 years old now. No, wait, I'm 63. Sometimes I forget, because I feel older, weathered by what I've been through. But I also feel younger somehow, like I'm just beginning to understand who I am separate from who I've been to other people. My chest has healed. The scar is still there, will always be there, a thin line marking where they opened me up and took out the thing that was killing me. But I don't hide it. Sometimes, when I'm getting dressed or taking a shower, I run my fingers along it and think about everything it represents. The tumor, yes. The brilliant surgery. But also the breaking open that needed to happen, in my body and in my life, for me to finally be whole. If you've made it to the end of this story, thank you. Thank you for listening. Thank you for seeing me, even though we've never met. And if this story moved you, if it made you think about your own relationships or your own worth, please check the description box below. There are more stories there like mine, stories about people who had to lose everything before they could find themselves, stories about families torn apart and stitched back together, stories about the courage it takes to demand that your life, your pain, your presence matters. Subscribe if you want to hear more. Comment and tell me where you're watching from. Tell me if you've ever felt invisible in your own life. Share this if you know someone who needs to hear it. Because the truth is, we're all just trying to be seen. We're all just hoping that when we need someone to show up, they will. And sometimes when they don't, we have to show up for ourselves. My daughter flew her best friend to Rome while I had surgery. They forgot to ask who my surgeon was, until we appeared on national news. And that's the moment everything changed. Not because of the fame or the controversy or the documentary award, but because I finally stopped being the forgotten mother and became a woman who refused to be forgotten. That's my story. That's the truth of what happened. And I'm not sorry for telling it.